I have the honor of serving as board chair. We have a full agenda today and a decent amount of time to get through it, so with no further ado, let's get rolling. The first item on the agenda is the agenda itself. Does anyone on the board have any recommended modifications to the agenda? Eric Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move item 9, the episodic event report, to earlier in the agenda. Whether you incorporate it into item 7 or something else, I would appreciate that. I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you. I would suggest that it might work well just prior to item 7. So we would take it up after item 6 and before item 7 as the agenda is currently structured. That's the proposal. Does anyone have any objection to moving that agenda item in the way that I just indicated? Seeing none, we'll do that. Does anyone have any other suggested changes? Yes, Dr. Rhodes.
And I don't know if we'll need it, but since we're starting this meeting 25 minutes early, do we need to have, just possibly prior to our recess, another time for public comment in case people are coming for 11:30, or at least put a marker there in case we need that so we don't disadvantage their ability to speak?
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I will do that. I will circle back to public comment after we undertake, I think, the next agenda item after public comment and before lunch. That'll be my plan. Thank you. Good suggestion. Other suggested changes? Seeing none, any objection to approving the agenda as modified? Seeing none, the agenda as modified stands approved, and we're on to the next item, which is the approval of the proceedings from the board's last meeting held on May 9th, 2017. Are there any recommended changes to those minutes? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving the minutes as proposed? Seeing none, the minutes stand approved by consent, and as always, we extend our thanks to Dot for doing such a great job as our stenographer. I always find the meeting minutes to be so well done and so valuable, and again, thank you for doing such a great job. We talk a lot, and you do a great job capturing it. Item 3 is public comment. We don't have anyone signed up right now. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on any issue that is not on the agenda? Seeing no hands, we'll move on, but we will come back to that opportunity after we undertake our next agenda item, which is the 2017 stock assessment update. The recently completed stock assessment update for Menhaden, in essence, is an update to the 2015 benchmark assessment, incorporating the most recent 3 years of data. That would be 2014 through 2016. Before I turn to Jason McNamee, the board's TC chair, for his presentation, I want to note for those members of the public who may be in the room or listening in that there are 2 documents in the board's meeting materials pertaining to the update. One is the very detailed and very well done 180-page report put together by the Commission's Menhaden Stock Assessment Committee, chaired by Dr. Amy Schuler. The other, which is in the supplemental meeting materials, is a very well-written and readily digestible 6-page summary, which I believe Tina Berger had a hand in authoring. So on behalf of the board, I want to thank everyone who worked so hard and so effectively to develop both documents. And with that, and the recognition that we have about 45 minutes slated for this agenda item in its entirety, Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I've got about 40 slides here, so I'll try to go relatively quickly through this, but not so quickly that you can't see what's going on. So just a quick overview. I'm going to go through the data that we used for the assessment. I'm then going to get into the stock assessment itself. I'll talk to you a little bit about sensitivity runs that we did and the retrospective information, all of that model diagnostic kind of stuff. There are some changes that occurred in the output. The model's performing well. The diagnostics are decent, but the information has changed a little bit. And so I'm going to dig into that a little bit, or a lot actually, to give you some good detail and hopefully make sure you understand why that occurred. And same thing with the reference points. I'm going to really, I've got a number of slides on that to really detail and hopefully clarify what's going on there for you. Okay, data. We have life history data in the model. The maturity data for Menhaden is historical data from some research that was done. We modified our interpretation of that data during the benchmark, and we are continuing to use that interpretation. We have a natural mortality vector in there. It's age varying but time constant, so it's one vector that is the same year to year but different by age. And that information is scaled to the estimates from some tagging data that was done on Menhaden. Growth is estimated from fishery dependent data, and all of this is consistent with what was used in the benchmark assessment. So when I'm going to talk about, just to make sure everyone's clear, benchmark, that was the peer-reviewed benchmark assessment that was completed in 2015, and then the new assessment information is updated. So benchmark and update, just to make sure you're clear on that, because I use those two terms a lot during the presentation. Okay, first plot. This is reduction landings. What you see on this plot is the northern reduction landings are in blue. The reduction landings from the south are in, I'm going to call it orange. I don't know what it looks like up there. Yeah, it's orangish. So one thing that's important here is we have now a spatially structured model. It's structured by way of fleets, and the line that divides north and south is set on the eastern shore of Virginia. So that's why there are northern reduction landings indicated on here. Even though they're low, there is some fishing that takes place out on the ocean side of Virginia. But you can see generally a downward trend in the southern reduction landings, and a large drop-off early on in the data set with the northern reduction landings. Okay, bait landings. So just to orient you to these plots, again, on the y-axis is landings in metric tons. Along the bottom, in both cases, is year. The orange line is the information from the update assessment, so that's the very new, the newest information. And then you'll see a little green that kind of pokes out there. What that is the information that we had put into the benchmark assessment. So just to start off, the Stock Assessment Committee decided to use the updated landings. So the orange line in total is what we used in the assessment. The reason for these differences, and remember the scale here, if you think back to that previous plot, the scale on these y-axes are in order of magnitude different. So these differences are small, and they're in the beginning of the data set there. The reason they occurred is we found a couple of errors. There was some double counting during the benchmark, specifically in Florida and Maine reduction landings during that early time period. So we corrected those. And then we all went back and reviewed the bait landings throughout the entire data set and found a couple of errors, nothing major though. So these aren't big changes, and we tested the model sensitivity to these differences as well. Recreational landings, so this is based off of MRIP. Again, same structure here as you saw on the last slide, and again, the y-axis is yet another order of magnitude different. So these are a very small component of the overall removals. But these differences, and again, we decided to use the the orange line for the update assessment. These differences are due to changes in the MRIP, the auditing, and things like that go on each year for MRIP, and so that's where those differences came from. Fishery independent. So the data sets reviewed and used during the benchmark were used to create standardized indices, and so we followed that same procedure for the update. The reason for doing this standardization is it accounts for catchability differences due to factors such as time of year, temperature, or other environmental covariates. So it kind of removes those effects from the information. That's the idea behind that. This treatment is consistent with that used for the benchmark, and we had a little subcommittee that we developed, the FIG, the Fishery Independent Working Group, and we had that same structure here. So everything is really consistent with the benchmark approach. So we have 3 indices of relative abundance that go into the model. There's a Young of the Year index that represents, not shockingly, Young of the Year fish. There's a Northern Adult Index, and you'll see that referred to as the NAD from here on out. And that is age 2 and older, so that's our broadest set of ages that are represented in the fishery independent information. And then there's the Southern Adult Index. That is predominantly age 1 with a few age 2s in it, but that's a much smaller range of ages in the SAD index. Here's a plot of that information, and so the index values on the y-axis, year across the bottom. I'm hoping that we were consistent with the color scheme. Nope, looks like we've flipped it in this case. Sorry about that. So the blue is the update assessment information for the Southern Adult Index, and the orange is from the benchmark. And basically, you know, what I would suggest to you here is they are pretty close, considering this is a modeling approach that we use. These 2 data sets with the benchmark information and the 3 additional years of information are producing the same historical information, so that's good news. And then the Northern Adult Index, same color scheme. Orange is from the benchmark, blue is the update. Again, the models fit really well. That really big peak changed with the most recent information. But I will focus you in on, oh, you know what, I forgot. So I'm going to pop back up one slide. The Southern Adult Index consists of the CMAP trawl survey and the Georgia trawl survey. That's what's in that, that index. So it's a combination of 2 different surveys. And then back down to the Northern Adult Index. These are all trawl surveys. It's the VIMS, ChessMap, ChessFIMS, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware 16, and Delaware 30-foot trawl. So again, a bunch of trawl survey information represented in this index. So back to the point I was just about to make, if you look at the most recent 3 years, so the blue line where the orange line doesn't overlap with it, keep those in the back of your head. They'll become important later on in the presentation. But you can see in the most recent period of time, the Northern Adult Index is increasing in magnitude. And then here is the Young of the Year Index. There's 16 different surveys. They're of different flavors. There's seine surveys. There's, I think, electrofishing surveys. All kinds of stuff in here. I'm not going to itemize them out for you. But again, you can see that the information from the benchmark to the update assessment is all pretty similar. And again, you see a little uptick in that Young of the Year information in the most recent years. Reduction catch at age, the number of collections, number of fish aged were all updated. The bait catch at age, number of collections, and number of fish aged were also updated. And then the length composition for the Southern Adult and Northern Adult Index indices were updated. There was some updating that occurred there, just like I was talking about, like with the MRIP data. As we went back and reviewed, we made some adjustments to that data, corrected errors more or less, but none of them were large, and as I just showed you, they didn't have a big impact on the information that was produced. Okay, now on to the stock assessment itself. The start year is 1955, the terminal year is 2016. We have 6 ages in the model. That last age group is a plus group, meaning it contains all of the animals 6 and older. The day 1 for each year in the model is March 1st. This is a fleets as areas model, so I talked a little bit about there's a north and a south in this model. That becomes important in the model structure when we talk about things like selectivity and how we split out the landings data and things like that, but it's not a spatial model in that these are being assessed as discrete spatial units, but there is some spatial structure in the model developed as the jargon for it is fleets. There are 4 fisheries with landings and age compositions. So the north and the south, bait and reduction. If you add those up, it equals 4. There's 1 young of the year index, 2 adult indices, and 2 sets of length composition sources of data that go into the model. Again, the data were split into northern and southern regions. The reason why we did this and the justification for it is the migration of these fish throughout the year. It becomes important by way of selectivity with the older, larger fish moving further to the north. Fishery dynamics as well are important, and the tagging data also, all of this stuff supported our use of these 2 areas in the model. And again, the reason we did this is it better accounts for population dynamics and fishery removals over time. We used the stock assessment run that was recommended by the CDAR review panel. If you think back a couple years ago, what this is, it's basically the base run that the stock assessment working group suggested. So all of the model parameterization is exactly the same as what between the peer review recommendation and the stock assessment committee recommendation for the base run. The one difference is the reviewers recommended we downweight some of the length composition information, and so that's the run that we used. It has this downweighted length composition information in it. And what this does within the model is it allows the length information to inform selectivity. We need it to inform selectivity. That's how it functions in the model, but it's not influencing the other model outputs. So I think there was some confusion on which run we were using, and so I just wanted to clarify that. And this is in the benchmark report. This is in the addendum of the benchmark report for folks who are really interested in and want to get into the details of that. All right, so here's some output information. This first one is recruitment. So the y-axis here is in billions of fish year across the bottom. You can see there was some really high recruitment or a really high recruitment event early on in the time series, and then again in the middle of the time series they're kind of peaking in the early 80s, and it's declined going into the 2000s with some more recent, I'll call them notable recruitment events. I think one of them is in 2010, and then the most recent year indicates a decent recruitment event. Biomass, y-axis is in thousands of metric tons. It sounds like, is it Carl Sagan, millions and millions of, so that's thousands of metric tons. This is the biomass vector through time, so years across the bottom. You can see there was high biomass early on in the time series, and then it peaks up again in the 80s, just like the recruitment did. And then biomass expands again in the most recent period of time, and a lot of that is due to the age structure expanding in the population. So that's a good sign. Here is another look at that same type of information. This is the numbers of fish. So this is billions of fish on the y-axis, year across the bottom. Similar trend to the last two data sets that we looked at. You can see in the most recent period of time, the numbers aren't as impressive as the biomass appeared to be. And again, that's because a lot of that increase in biomass is coming from older, bigger fish being in the population. It's hard to see, you know, the orange on this plot is the young of the year, and hopefully you can read that scale on there. As the colors go from the bottom of the chart to the top, the fish are getting older. It gets kind of, the signal gets swamped by how many young of the year there are, but you can see the signal in the biomass that age structure is expanding. Okay, here is fecundity. This is in billions of eggs. That's the y-axis, year along the bottom. So the reason we have fecundity up here is this is our metric of stock productivity. This is what our reference point is based on. And so that's why we wanted to show you this one independently. And again, similar trend to what we've been talking about with, you know, decent signal in the most recent period of time, although the fecundity seems to be going down. This metric is based on some research that was done on fecundity and size of fish, and so that's how this is a calculation that's done by the stock assessment, where you take the age and length structure of the population and then multiply that by a relationship to fecundity. That's how that number, we weren't out there counting eggs in the water or something like that. Okay, fishing mortality rate. That is the y-axis, year along the bottom. You can see that fishing mortality was really high in the early time series and then has dropped down significantly. I'll focus you in on, if you look to about the mid-90s, you can see that from the mid-90s to current, there's been a downward trend in that fishing mortality information, bouncing around at a low value in the most recent period of time. So I'm going to walk through now some sensitivity runs. Here, the sensitivities that we're looking at are, we did a fixed Q for the Northern Adult Index. The reason why we did that is, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail, but I'll kick the conversation off here. One of the things that happened in the update assessment is, if you think back when I showed you the Northern Adult Index, the most recent period of time had these pretty high spikes in information, and what that did to the stock assessment is it leveraged a lot of the population dynamic information. It leveraged it depending on which metric it went up or down. The reason why that happened is there's this quantity called Q in the model, and that is the catchability. And what that does is it scales, in this case, the fishery independent information up to the full population size. And that Q changed from the update, from the benchmark to the update. That's an important thing to keep in mind, and again, I'll talk about that in more detail in subsequent slides. So one of the sensitivities we wanted to test was, well, what happens if we fix that Q to what was in the benchmark? We also, because of this leveraging that the Northern Adult Index had on the assessment, we dropped it and looked at what that did to the assessment information. We tested some sensitivity to natural mortality. We did an upper and lower bound, kind of picked the high and the low and ran them at those different levels. And then we did another catchability sensitivity for the young of the year another Q sensitivity for the young of the year index. We did an additional set of sensitivities. This was based on our initial vetting of this information with the technical committee. And so we did a sensitivity with the benchmark bait landing, so we didn't use those updated numbers. I had mentioned that already. And then we tested a couple of different fixed Q values from different time periods for that northern adult index. I'm not going to show you all of those sensitivities because I'm probably going to run long anyways. So just know that the information that I'm showing you is indicative of all of these different sensitivity runs. So for instance, the bait landing sensitivity, it showed no influence on the model. They were virtually the same as the base run. So here is the first set of sensitivity information. The plot on the left is the geometric mean F values. I think it's for ages 2 through 4. On the right-hand plot is recruits in billions of fish again. And so what you can see here is, I'm guessing it's hard to read. It's hard to read on my screen too, so it's probably really bad up there. But you'll have to trust me when I say that the one that really influenced the information and moved it away from the baseline is that green line, and that's where we dropped the northern adult index from the assessment altogether. So point of that is that's a really important index in the stock assessment. It's providing a lot of information for the assessment. It's why you know, the most recent 3 years of information had such a strong influence on the model output. Recruitment, again, the big one there is the blue line kind of shifts everything way up. That one, not shockingly for recruitment, is that was the high natural mortality. So if you dump in a bunch of additional mortality into the stock assessment, it tries to fill the gap by making a bunch of new fish. And so that was not a surprising finding for us. But in general, the other sensitivities that we did didn't have a large influence on the model. Here's the next sensitivity. So we have biomass on the left and fecundity on the right. Again, that high natural mortality run was the most influential in these sensitivity runs. Again, not a surprising finding. But then the green line on the left and the right, those were a bit more of something to note. And so again, that is the dropping that northern adult index altogether. And you can see for the fecundity, it's really influential on what that does to the model. So that northern adult index is an important source of information for the model. I'm sorry, it's not the final. The next set is the northern adult index on the left, the southern adult index on the right. Sensitivities were not particularly influential on the model output, with the exception, again, of the no northern adult index. That one obviously does not exist in the left-hand plot, but it does on the right, and you can see in the early time series it decreases the fit to the southern adult index if the northern adult index is not in the model. Here's the fit to the young of the year, and then the big influential sensitivity here was the 1Q for the young of the year index. We have that split out into 2 time periods, and I won't get into the details of why. You can ask me a question after if you're really interested in that, but just note that we have 2 time periods where we allow it to define different catchabilities, and if we get rid of those 2 time periods, it decreases the fit of the model to that data set. So that was the most influential sensitivity for the young of the year fit. Okay, so here is, these are now sensitivities for some of your reference point information. And so on the left is your, that is the I'm going to get this wrong. I have it, let me see. Okay. On the left is the threshold, and on the right is the target. The dotted line, so what these are showing is not the actual value, but showing the proportion of current F to those different reference points. So if they were exactly equal to each other, if you were right at the threshold or right at the target, it would be 1. And so that's what that dotted line represents. And so in the case of fishing mortality, which is what this first set of plots represents, you want to be below that dotted line. Hopefully that makes sense. So we've got here the sensitivity runs. Here you can see the most influential information on how this information performs relative to the reference points is if the natural mortality is low. Think about that logically. What the model has to do is then increase fishing mortality to make up the gap for what all the rest of the information is telling it. So that is the top, that light blue line, which you can kind of make out up there. And then the other two are, again, the no northern adult index and the high natural mortality has the opposite effect. So if there's a lot of natural mortality out there, it deflates the fishing mortality. And, you know, same, they're both relatively similar from left to right. So those are the most influential assumptions and pieces of information that we're using in the model. Here is our fecundity metric. Same setup here. This is a ratio, threshold on the left, target on the right. Here you want to be above that dashed line. Again, if you drop the northern adult index out, has a pretty significant impact on the assessment information. And natural mortality was the other important piece of information that the model has some sensitivity to. Okay, a little bit of information on the retrospective. So there is a retrospective pattern in the assessment with regard to what you're looking at on the screen here. We have geometric mean F on the left and recruitment on the right. Here the retrospective is not bad. You know, they're pretty similar. There is some separation at certain points in the data set, but they all then reconvene towards the beginning of the data set there. So that's good that it can kind of find that beginning again. But in general, the stock assessment committee didn't find this, or the technical committee didn't find this retrospective to be overly alarming, and isn't much different from what we had during the benchmark. Here is, again, this is that fishing mortality ratio. You want to be below the, in this case, solid black line. We ran Monte Carlo bootstraps on this information to get a sense of the uncertainty around our reference points and the model information with regard to those reference points. That's what the gray area represents on this plot. That's the uncertainty bounds. I will note that the stock assessment review committee, one of the notes that they made is we've lumped a little too much uncertainty into our bootstrapping routine, so that's something we'll have to dig into for the next benchmark. And so you can see the uncertainty, in particular in certain years, is pretty high. But in general, this is kind of an aggregate plot where you're looking at the uncertainty and the reference point and the retrospective all in one plot. And so I've got, this is the threshold, here's the target, same sort of information. I guess the important, I'm going to flip back up. The important thing here is both the retrospective and the uncertainty are all under the threshold reference point in this case. That's good. Here for the target, you can see some of the retrospective runs and a little bit of the uncertainty does jump up over the target in this case. So that gives you, I don't know, a good concept of the risk you're dealing with for Menhaden. Here's retrospective information with regard to biomass and fecundity. Here there was a bit more of a significant retrospective, in particular in the fecundity, and you know, it has to do with how far back it gets worse, and they kind of cluster around each other. We don't have a good explanation for that, but my recollection is this retrospective is not necessarily different from what we saw during the benchmark assessment. Again, a plot of retrospective uncertainty and reference point. And so here we're looking at the threshold again, and you can see all of the retrospective runs, and most of the uncertainty is up above the threshold with regard to fecundity. And here is the target, and it's the information's kind of straddling the target here. So you're right around the target with regard to the center of the uncertainty and the retrospective runs as well. Getting close to the home stretch here. So all of the strategies, data, assumptions, they were all the same between the benchmark and the update. There is a scale and trend difference that have occurred between the benchmark and the update, so I started talking to you a little bit about that already. We isolated the cause of this scale and trend change to the Northern Adult Index, and it's those, really it's those last 3 years that we added in, just have a lot of influence on the model. We talked about that a lot at the technical committee, and what we decided in the end is, and we talked about the different options that we had available to us, and tested those sensitivities. That's why we chose those sensitivity runs. But in the end, we recommended allowing the scale to be estimated by the model, and then to calculate the reference points using the same methods from the benchmark. And I'm going to detail what I mean there momentarily. I just wanted to note, part of the discussion that we had is the merits of the Northern Adult Index. They're high. I showed you that. It's really influential on the model, but it also has a lot of information in it. There's a lot of age classes represented, and the signals across, even though we're taking surveys from different areas, the signals are all pretty similar to each other. So we think that information is good, and therefore we give the Northern Adult Index high merit, and that's why we didn't mess around with it too much in the model. So here are now a set of slides with the changes from the benchmark to the update. So what you're looking at up on the slide is the mean fishing mortality. This is the geometric mean for ages 2 to 4. It's what I've been showing you all along in the various plots. So on the left is the update assessment. On the right is the benchmark. What you can see is we've got the target and the threshold represented on there. The threshold is the blue line up at the top. The target is the orange line at the bottom. You can see as you look from left to right, those lines aren't lining up. And the reason for that is the reference points that the board selected are a SPR approach. And what that means is what we did, I'm going to make sure I don't jumble this up and make you even more confused. So we're using a historical period of time. I believe it's, I've got a slide on this, but it's 1960 through 2012, I believe. That period of time is locked in. That does not change. I've talked to you already about the fact that the update assessment changed the values of fishing mortality through the time period. You can see that in these plots. If you look at the y-axis on the left, it goes up to 7. On the right, it only goes up to 5. So fishing mortality increased in the early time period in the update. And and basically throughout, because the population size changed. So if you take that locked-in historical period of time and calculate your reference point based on that, and the information within that window of time changed, your reference points changed. That's what happened with the reference point information. So model's fine, nothing philosophically changed within the model. It's just that the information of the population changed in the most recent update. I'll kind of spoil the surprise and note, and you can see it in this slide, the information that you're getting for management advice hasn't changed. It's still not overfished. Overfishing is not occurring. I just ruined the next couple slides for you, sorry. But the point is that even though the numbers that are on the graphs changed, what you have by way of advice has not changed much at all. Again, now this is your fecundity reference point metric. I won't talk about everything I just talked about again, but you can see here not only does the magnitude change for the fecundity metric, but also it kind of torqued the trend a little bit. It's still similar in the most recent period of time in that you have an increasing period, and then by way of the reference points, you're in exactly the same spot. You're below the target, but above the threshold. So again, your advice is the same. The information changed a little bit, but in general, the advice you're getting for management is the same. The 2015 benchmark reference points, they were calculated as F57%, F38%, that goes target and then threshold, and then the fecundity were the fecundity values that match those. And then the update, those changed, again, for the reasons I told you. When you have that locked-in period of time and you look at the information in that historical window and the information changes in that window, it changes the values that you're using, but the philosophy that you used remains the same. And so when you're looking at the update reference points, now you're talking about a F36 and F21 for your target and threshold. The reference points for the update were calculated using the exact same methods from the 2015 benchmark. So nothing has changed here other than the information used to calculate those reference points. So I'm again going to hit this again because I know it was something that was of concern to people coming into this meeting. So why the difference? The reference points are calculated through a spawner recruit analysis using mean values of time-varying components, so the growth and the maturity, we use mean values of those for the entire time period. The overfishing definition is based on the historical performance calculated as a maximum and a median geometric mean F for ages 2 to 4 during the period of 1960 through 2012. The reason that we picked those is that's a period of time where we believe the stock to be in a sustainable state. And so again, that's the reason why the reference points have changed. You know, I talked about the time period, but just to add into that, the other thing you're doing is using a maximum. So if the information changed, the maximum is also going to change, as will the median, because the information is different within that window of time. Because the update resulted in higher F values throughout the time series, that max and that median were estimated higher compared to the 2015 benchmark. But based on the current reference points, the stock status is the same as we brought to you during the benchmark. Not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring. Additionally, the stock is below the F target, but it's also below the fecundity target in this case. Just I'm not going to spend too much time on this plot. This is a phase plot, so the dotted lines here, again, represent that ratio of your reference point to the current state of the stock. On the y-axis is the fecundity, so that's your, and this one is this is fecundity is on the y-axis, fishing mortality along the x-axis. The dotted lines represent your 1-to-1 ratio, meaning you'd be right at the threshold or the target. It'll be the same on the next two slides. But you can see this is just another look at the uncertainty in the estimate. So here, the good zone that you want to be in is this upper left quadrant of the plot, and you can see the red dot in the middle of that banana shape there. That's the actual estimate. And then all of the black dots are the Monte Carlo bootstrap runs that we ran. And so you can see the vast majority of the bootstrap runs are in the good zone of this chart. And then with regard to the target, you can see in this case, we're not in that upper right-hand quadrant, and that is because we are below the fecundity target, just below it, but we are below the fishing mortality target. So that's not a, this is the target, so that's not a terrible zone to be in there. And again, the majority of the information falls in that. Some of it actually goes up into that upper left-hand quadrant, but the majority of it is in that bottom left-hand quadrant. Okay, just a table, one more slide after this, we're almost there. A table of the reference points again, so you've got F 21% MSP is your threshold. That is set at 1.85. Your target is set at 0.80, and your current is 0.51. So you're below both of those with regard to fishing mortality. And then fecundity, I won't, you can read those numbers up there, but you can see you're between both the threshold and the target with regard to fecundity, and you can see the magnitude. I can flip back to this table at the end if you'd like. So, summary slide. The model continues to perform well, you know, very similar to the benchmark. There was a change in scale and trend that occurred with the additional information that we added in. The main driver of that is that Northern Adult survey that goes into the model. The assessment is still deemed useful for management advice by the Technical Committee, Stock Assessment Committee. And based on the current reference point, stock status is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. And that is it from me, Mr. Chair.
Thanks so much, Jay. Another excellent presentation. There's no need for any action on this. There is no need for a motion. It's not an action item, but we are certainly open to questions and comments. So would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, Lauren.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that excellent report, sir. I have a significant interest in historical perspective for this species. I took note in your second or third slide that there was data regarding the population numbers from around 1980 to current times, or soon to be current times if we were to extrapolate that, giving us about 35 years of data forward from 1980. My question relates to what about the data going back at approximately the same number of years? For example, back to 1940. And I'd like to see those numbers if they were available. I did notice that in 1980 there was a major spike in numbers, unfortunately short-lived. Is it your impression that that spike would not occur again given our current management? And did such spikes occur more frequently in those previous or earlier years, 1940 to 1980? Thank you.
Yep, I'll take a shot at that. I'm a little, I'll need a little clarification on part of it, but I will start here. We do have information going back, I think, before the 40s from Menhaden. I think you can find some of that more historical information in the benchmark report. You know, again, this is an update, so we didn't add in a lot of that background stuff, trying to make it a little more slim than I think the benchmark was probably double the size of this update assessment. So that information does exist. We made a decision during that benchmark to only use the period of time that we have in there. The time period that we actually are using in the model starts in 1955, so we're not too far beyond the 1940 period you were talking about. I guess and so that's where my confusion then exists. You're talking about spikes, and you said numbers, so we do have numbers going back all the way to 1955 produced by the model, and so I'm not clear if maybe you couldn't see the scale along the bottom well and you've got the wrong reference period, or if you were specifically looking at that period of the 1980s, and then I'll better be able to at least try to answer your final question.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. I am concerned about the population numbers and wondering if they were significantly higher before 1980 on a continuous basis. And if that was the case, is it possible for us to recover numbers to approximately those levels for years of coming ahead?
So, so the way that I would answer your question is to say, per the reference points that we've put in, which are supposed to be protective of the population and allow for full rebuilding, and the fact that we're, you know, below the threshold or above it, depending on which metric you're talking about, I guess maybe I'll boil it down to say stock status is good. So I would suggest that if the conditions were to present themselves, yeah, it could rebuild to those levels again. Menhaden, as we all know, are subject to a lot of additional things that influence the population, like environment, predators, things like that. And so those also control the population. And so to answer your question, if things were to line up across all of those different metrics, you could rebuild this stock to its maximum level for the metrics that we can control as fisheries managers. We've got the population in the spot where we suggested we wanted it. That's why we set those reference points where we did. And so, you know, stock status is good. I would suggest that the conditions on the other side, were they to line up, it could rebuild to those numbers that we saw in the 80s.
You good, Lauren?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'd like it, you know, you spoke about fully restored. I don't have any question in my mind that fully restored would be an excellent position to be at, you know, for a whole variety of reasons. And so I'm hoping that at some point we will be dealing with much larger population numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jay, you noted and made reference to a number of times the northern index and how it's increasing in magnitude. I'm wondering if the TC has had a discussion on why that's happening. Is it stock expansion? Is it climate change? Is it a change in age composition, or is it something else?
I think I understood your question, and so I'll kind of come at it at two angles. Logistically, in the model, it has a lot of information in it, so it is one of the sources of information that we have independent from the fishery, where we're getting information on older ages of fish, and we haven't had that prior to the benchmark. And so that's why, I think it's having a lot of influence on the model. And then I think maybe another angle at your question is, why are the northern indices going up? It could, I think you mentioned a couple of potential hypotheses, but in general, what we can see from the stock assessment output is the population is increasing and expanding its age composition. And what we know about Menhaden, based on historical tagging data and a lot of the research that was done on this species, is the older, bigger fish migrate further north. And so that, as the age structure and the population size expands, it is part and parcel that those northern adult indices would also go up.
Yes, John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the great presentation, Jay. That was a heck of a lot of data you have there. I was just confused a little early on in the presentation. You talked about catchability changing from the benchmark to the update. Could you just explain that a little more?
I will try my best, John. So, what the model does is it takes your fishery independent information, which, if you think about your trawl survey information for any species, it's, they're low numbers. We don't do millions of tows a year. It's a small number of tows, and so you get numbers, on the order of, for some species it's below 1, but 1, 2, 3, that kind of thing for the year. And so what the assessment does is it then takes that information and scales it to what it believes is the size of the population. That's what that Q parameter is. It's a scaler to boost your, well, it works in both directions, so it brings the population size on the same scale as your fishery independent information, and vice versa. So that's what that Q, that catchability parameter, does in the model. And what happened, and so mathematically, we don't know. We've sort of isolated the cause of the Q to the Northern Adult Index, exactly why the model decided to do that, to try and find its overall lowest likelihood. We don't know. Only the computer knows. But that's the gist of it. Is those numbers went up, and when the model refit that data set and then tried to rescale it, it changed that Q parameter from the benchmark to the current assessment.
John, to follow?
Yeah, I think I understood. You're just saying it's more just an artifact of the model that really has nothing. It's an abstract. There's nothing going on out in the system that you can say would change catchability.
Correct, yeah. This is a statistical estimation that's done within the model to try and minimize all of that information altogether. It's one of the, I don't know, hundreds of dials that the model's in there trying to tune. So yeah, it's nothing that we can ascribe some biological causation to. Some of the parameters we can, that's not one of them.
Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jay. And I read in the report that the fishery-dependent indices were correlated with the fishery-independent indices, and I guess in the benchmark, the idea was to get some state-specific, I'll say, validation. And I also remember, at least secondhand, that there was quite a hunt before the benchmark to improve on the fishery-dependent indices, and it was a big task. And now I see that at least this update, they weren't really taken into account. Is that something that will come back for the next benchmark, or how does that work out?
I'm not sure I understood you, Rob, but let me take a shot at it, and you can correct me if I missed. So you were, because I thought you had misspoken, you said fishery-dependent indices, and that's what you meant. Okay, we did, so I'm kind of conflated with a number of different assessments that I've worked on in the past year, so I'm trying to tease out exactly what we reviewed for Menhaden and all of the other things is a little foggy for me, but I'm assuming we did test some fishery-dependent sources of information. During the benchmark process, I think what we decided was, well, now we have a bunch of fishery-independent information that we can use, therefore we don't need to use fishery-dependent indices of abundance. And so we made that choice during the benchmark. The update is just a repeat, so that would be a big benchmark level decision, and we did not, for this update, change that. Could we review them again for the next benchmark? We certainly could, but that, I believe, is the choice we made during the benchmark process, which we just repeated here for the update.
Rob, a follow?
Yes, so that wasn't clear in reading through it, but the explanation is great. And, you know, there it was Massachusetts Pound Net, New Jersey Gill Net, Maryland Pound Net, and PRC Pound Net. So it wasn't clear that they were already taken care of earlier. And if I may ask one other question.
Go ahead.
Okay. It's on the same situation, the Northern Adult Index. And in looking at the chart that you had up there, you would almost say there was a sort of nullification of the trend in the last 3 years. It looked like 2014 was a spike, 2015 was a drop, and 2016 was up. So is the BAM model more sensitive to that terminal year, or is it more that the trend was a sort of a rising trend that the BAM model was fitting at that time?
Yeah, I think we can actually go into the document. The fits to the indices are in there. They definitely go up and down. I agree with you on that. I would suggest they go up and down at a high level. And so I'm guessing, I can't remember specifically, I'm guessing the model probably shot right through the middle of that up and down, but in general, that middle is up above the rest of the time series in the most recent period of time.
Pat Kelleher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellent presentation, Jay. I just on the line of questioning from Mr. Clark, this scaling of fishing mortality rate, does it give the TC any pause or any level of uncertainty associated with that? Are you I'm taking the way you've described that as the TC, even though there's quite a change because of that data, inclusion of data from the last 3 years, the TC is comfortable with the results that came from the model. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So I think the way I'll answer that is we talked about that a lot. That was probably the majority of our meetings. So there was certainly concerns among the technical committee, but I'll maybe offer you the way that we get concerned about things is different than the way I think you all might. And so the way that we thought about it, we were concerned it was a big shift that's never, I'm sorry, it was a big shift in scale in that Q parameter, and it did some things to the output, but overall the model diagnostics were still good. So when you look at it comprehensively, we were comfortable with the model outputs. We do already have a set of things that we're going to investigate for the benchmark to try and figure out why that Northern Adult Index is so influential on the assessment, and you know, we'll investigate that more, but we, I guess I'll say, made peace with it. You know, the model diagnostics were good overall. And we tested the sensitivity, so we did all of the things that we thought were necessary to kind of get us comfortable with it, and felt in the end that we were comfortable with the model outputs, even though they changed from the benchmark magnitudes.
Take a few more questions or comments. Emerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason, for your excellent presentation. I have two questions. One is in the benchmark and then in the update, is M held constant throughout the time series regardless of biomass?
M is time static, so it does not change. It's a single vector that goes in for the entire time period. It does change by age, though, so M is highest on the youngest age classes, lowest on the oldest age classes. So, you know, it's a little of both. It does change by age, but through time, it is a static vector of information.
So as the numbers, and this is the second part of the first question. So then as the numbers of individuals at the different ages, as that composition changes, that's what changes M in the model, right? Or am I not following you then?
Yep, nope. The numbers, it's sort of an independent entity that gets input into the model. It's based on this theoretical Lorenzen curve that we scaled to some historical tagging information, but the numbers of fish do not influence what the M value is. They're not connected.
Right, so as biomass goes up or down and predation may go up or down, M remains constant through the time series.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The second question then is, if age structure is expanding, particularly in the northern part of the range, then do you have any sense of why fecundity is dropping? Do we have more individuals who are perhaps outside of that sweet spot for fecundity? So we've got lesser numbers of adults at the age that produce the greatest number of eggs? Or is the number of eggs at those different sizes changing with time?
Yeah, I'm speculating on this one. It's an excellent question. One thing I didn't kind of check in on. I noticed that as well, and I had meant to go back and see if I could figure out why that trend was occurring as well. So speculation on my part. It probably is in the document somewhere buried in there, but I'm guessing it is being influenced by the numbers at age, and it could be that the very oldest ages decline a little bit, and that's, if you think about it, it's an exponential relationship, and so even though those numbers of the very oldest fish are small, if you change them at all, it's going to have a big influence on that fecundity value. So that, again, hypothesis, I don't know if I would even give it that much weight, but just one potential reason why that's occurring.
Yes, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that great presentation. And I'm not sure if this question is relative to this presentation or maybe answered in some other one. But on your historical Atlantic Menhaden bait landings, I'm just trying to figure out, in 2010, it was 42,000, 2011, these are round numbers, off the chart 52, then it jumps up to 65, and then in 2013 it drops to 38,000 metric tons. And is there any, I'm trying to get my arms around that sharp rise in bait landings and then that 1 year drop that's considerable. And I'm not sure if this is the forum to ask that question or not.
Sorry. So Megan just whispered in my ear that that's probably management related. That was was it the last addendum or 2 addendums ago or something like that? Oh, Amendment 2. So that's a management influenced change, we believe.
Are you good, Doug?
I'm good.
Time for two more. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jay, excellent presentation. I've got a much better handle on, I had a whole list of questions, but you've answered most of them. I'm still, you've done a great job of explaining the change in reference points, but I'm still have some concern about going from the benchmark assessment that had the reference point at 57% of an unfished spawning potential, and then now it's at 36%. I think you've explained kind of how it's worked in the model, and I've got a better understanding. I guess my question would be, you know, when we do the benchmark assessment, will that change again as we go forward? And would it be prudent for us, you know, to look at those reference points to have something a little more stable, or yeah, I guess just for management, how we're doing that. The model suggests a difference, but does that equate into the actual fishery or for management? And I guess the bottom line is, what are the ramifications based on that change? You've got your summary slide up here that kind of tells us, you know, we're in pretty good shape, and that's positive. But how does that change in the reference points? How will that, what are the ramifications to the fishery as we go forward? Thanks.
Yep, I guess I'll start by saying, you know, with regard to the stability of those reference points, that's a policy decision, a board type decision. But to answer your question directly, could they change again? As long as we're using these proxy reference points that are based on, you know, the procedures that we've chosen, yeah, they'll change. You know, they could change very little if the information is really static and stable from update to update, or they could change a lot, and then conceivably they could change because we change the philosophy of the reference points we want. So, you know, the broad answer to all of your questions is yes. But as far as, you know, how to make them more stable, that sort of thing, I think is, you know, a discussion for the board to have.
Interesting exchange there. We have time for, I think, just one more. If anyone wants to be the last, you now have the opportunity. I see no hands up, so we'll wrap this. Oh, Jay?
Yeah, so I neglected. I was trying to get through the presentation so quickly. Just, you know, big thanks to Amy Schuler, did the bulk of the work on the assessment. Amy is fantastic. Thanks to her, and also the rest of the stock assessment group did a lot of work getting the indices and things like that together. And then thanks to the TC, we got a lot of good feedback from the TC, which, you know, improved the document and the model as well. So a lot of work went into this, even though it was just an update. And I just wanted to not forget to say thanks.
And I know I echo the sentiments of everybody on the board in saying we feel the same way. Thank you. At this point, we're very close to lunch, but we do have a little time left for anyone who may have arrived late and missed the public comment period. I would afford an opportunity for anyone from the public who's here now and would like to address the board on any issue that's not on today's agenda to be able to do so now. Is there anyone who would like to address the board? Seeing no hands, that means we're on to item 5, which is lunch. This is a non-debatable issue, so we're going to recess now for lunch and reconvene. Should we stick with 1:20?
Yes, please.
We'll reconvene promptly at 1:20. Thank you.